I thought repainting my old farm gate would be a relaxing weekend project. Turns out, it sparked a full-on war. She came at me like a courtroom drama queen, shouting fines, threats, and HOA nonsense. What she didn't see coming was me, and what looked like a petty feud over paint was about to uncover something way bigger than she could ever control. I'm not the kind of man to roll over, especially not when the law is on my side. I'm Mike Harrison, 42nd, former Chief Planning Inspector, 15 years deep in zoning laws, building codes, and municipal red tape across 3 states. I just retired to live off the land my grandfather left me. 200 acres of open sky, dirt roads, and quiet freedom. Locals call me the city guy turned farmer. They see jeans, a vest, and a beat-up truck. What they don't see is a guy who knows the system inside out. And then there's Sandra Phillips, 47th president of the Sunset Valley HOA for 3 years and counting. Always in designer clothes, always on a power trip. She runs the place like she's chairing a corporate boardroom, handing out fines for things like unapproved mailbox flags and off-season lawn decor. Her wardrobe could run a fashion magazine, but her leadership? It's built on fear and control. My mistake? Painting my front gate forest green. Yep, just a color. One not listed in Sandra's sacred approved palette. But here's what she didn't know. My land? It's not even under HOA control. Legally, I'm outside her jurisdiction, but I figured I'd let her walk into that trap on her own. Day 1. A hand-delivered letter, printed on glossy HOA paper, demanding I repaint the gate to maintain visual harmony. 48 hours, she said. I laughed, tossed it into the trash, and poured myself a fresh coffee. Day 3. Another letter. This time, a $500 fine for defiance of community aesthetics and failure to respond to HOA notice. Now it was getting interesting. So I installed cameras. I told everyone it was for wildlife monitoring. Day 5, the inspection squad rolled up. Sandra and her clipboard gang, 3 board members in tow, dressed like they were inspecting a nuclear facility. They had tape measures, pro cameras, and a serious case of self-importance. I played it cool, offered sweet tea and cookies, let them roam. While I quietly recorded everything, they looked confused when they saw how big the place was. Barns, livestock, hills that stretch into the trees. How much land do you have? One asked. Oh, about 200 acres, I said with a shrug. Their faces, priceless. Day 7, Sandra launched a smear campaign on the neighborhood Facebook group. She posted a dramatic photo of my gate, perfectly lit like a crime scene. Caption: Some residents believe they are above our shared community rules. We must protect our neighborhood values. She got 47 likes in an hour, dozens of comments applauding her. I screenshotted every single one. Day 10, the fines jumped to $1,000 a day. Yep, $1,000 for paint. I got a certified letter, signature required. That's when I broke out my old law books. HOA charter? Check. Bylaws? Check. And a dozen ways they'd already violated their own policies. Oh yeah, check. By day 12, Sandra went full villain. She called the local paint shop, Patterson Paint, and told them not to sell forest green paint to anyone from our zip code. Said it was for community protection. I found out through Jack, the guy who runs the counter. He was furious. So was I. This wasn't just a paint fight anymore. It was about control, power, and someone finally standing up to a bully in a pantsuit. She came after the wrong guy, and the war over the Green Gate was just the beginning. It all took a wild turn when Jack, the local hardware store owner, gave me a heads up. Mike, I've been selling paint for over 2 decades, he said, half laughing, but I've never had anyone try to ban a color from an entire neighborhood. Your HOA lady's got a control complex. By day 15, Sandra was turning this into her personal reality show. She arrived with what I can only describe as her neighborhood task force. 5 board members, clipboards in hand, measuring devices swinging from their belts, snapping pictures like they were building a case for the Supreme Court. They showed up in 3 matching SUVs and parked right in front of my farm like they were about to raid a drug lab. Except all they were here for was a green gate. I figured if she wanted theatrics, I'd give her a show. I offered them coffee and blueberry muffins fresh out of the oven, played the friendly farmer like a pro. Then I invited them on a full tour of my 200-acre spread in my mud-splattered work truck. We drove across open fields, around the pond, down by the old shed, and along the fence line that stretched so far you couldn't see the end of it. They started out smug. That confidence didn't last. Sandra's voice cracked a bit when she asked, "Wait, all of this land? You own it?" "Yup," I said, grinning. "From here to those oak trees, then a mile down the creek." You could practically hear their collective panic, but I just kept smiling and nodding like a clueless farm boy who had no idea why they cared so much about a little gate collar. Then came day 18, the day Sandra nuked her own HOA career. She pulled up mid-morning with 2 guys in painter's overalls, ladders, and cans of beige paint in tow. Following them was a man in a tailored suit, holding what looked like an official invoice for $1,200. Sandra stood tall and smug. "This property will be forcibly corrected today," she declared, "under emergency HOA authority, and the homeowner will be charged for restoration costs." I stood my ground and said, politely but firmly, "No. You're not setting foot on my land." That was the moment the mask dropped. Her composure gone. She yanked out her phone and called 911 like I was committing a felony by not letting her paint my gate. "I need officers here now," she shouted. "The homeowner is interfering with official HOA duties and refusing corrective action on dangerous code violations." 10 minutes later, 2 sheriff's deputies showed up. Sandra looked like she had already won, but her smug smile faded fast. I calmly laid out the paperwork, my deed, my survey, and a highlighted copy of the HOA boundary map that clearly showed my land wasn't included. The older deputy looked at her and said, "Ma'am, this seems to be a civil matter. He's not obligated to comply unless you have a court order." That's when Sandra made her biggest mistake yet. She pulled out her phone again and went live on Facebook, streaming herself as she screamed at the deputies. "This is insane. Law enforcement is siding with violators. I'll sue him. I'll sue the department. I'll sue the county. This is a disgrace." She was yelling so loudly her voice cracked, waving her phone around like a torch. This is what happens when good people try to uphold standards. We're losing our communities to people who hide behind legal loopholes. Her live rant spread fast, but not how she expected. Instead of support, people in the neighborhood started asking real questions. Why is she calling her neighbors criminals? Who gave her the right to ignore property lines? Is this really what HOA power is for? The backlash was instant. Sandra thought she was protecting community values. What she actually did was destroy her own reputation, and that green gate, still standing proud. After watching Sandra unravel in front of the sheriff's deputies, I knew the time had come to switch from defense to offense. That same evening, I sat down in my study, surrounded by legal books, zoning codes, and property law manuals I'd collected over the years during my career as a planning inspector. It was time to put those skills back to use. Digging into public records at the county courthouse, my first key discovery surfaced. My family's land, every last acre of the 200, had been continuously registered under our name since 1952. That was decades before the Sunset Valley HOA even existed, which only formed in 1987. Under long-standing property law, landowners can't be forced into HOA agreements unless they voluntarily sign specific legal contracts. I hadn't signed a single thing. No one ever even approached me about joining. My next breakthrough came from the HOA's own documents, their original charter and bylaws. Turns out, Sandra either never read them or chose to ignore them. Their authority extended only to residential parcels under 2 acres within clearly defined subdivision limits, as recorded in the land records. Not only was my farm over 100 times larger, but it also sat entirely outside those limits. Legally speaking, Sandra had no more jurisdiction over my property than she did over land across the county line. But the third find was the real bombshell. I uncovered records showing that in just 3 years, the HOA had collected over $47,000 in fines from residents. But according to state law, individual violations can't be fined more than $200, and each penalty must come after proper notice and the opportunity to appeal. Sandra had bypassed both. She'd been fleecing the neighborhood while padding the HOA's bank account. That's when I called an old friend, Emma Rodriguez, an attorney who specializes in housing law and HOAs. After hearing the details, she didn't hesitate. "This isn't just misconduct, Mike," she said. "It's potentially a major legal scandal. What she's doing is blatantly unlawful." But what I didn't expect was the next person who came to my side, Susan Martinez, the HOA's longtime secretary and the wife of board member David Martinez. She reached out using a coded email, pretending to want to discuss a community garden. We met quietly at a coffee shop far from the neighborhood. Over coffee, Susan revealed she'd been quietly documenting Sandra's abuses for 2 years. She slid a thick folder across the table, full of internal emails, call transcripts, and invoices. Sandra had been knowingly imposing fines above legal limits to teach people lessons, as she put it. In a recorded call, she even called residents sheep and said they need strong shepherds. But the most damaging proof? Sandra had been funneling HOA money to her husband's landscaping company for consulting services, work that mainly involved maintaining her own yard. Sandra thought she was protecting community values. What she actually did was destroy her own reputation, and that green gate, still standing proud. After watching Sandra unravel in front of the sheriff's deputies, I knew the time had come to switch from defense to offense. That same evening, I sat down in my study, surrounded by legal books, zoning codes, and property law manuals I'd collected over the years during my career as a planning inspector. It was time to put those skills back to use. Digging into public records at the county courthouse, my first key discovery surfaced. My family's land, every last acre of the 200, had been continuously registered under our name since 1952. That was decades before the Sunset Valley HOA even existed, which only formed in 1987. Under long-standing property law, landowners can't be forced into HOA agreements unless they voluntarily sign specific legal contracts. I hadn't signed a single thing. No one ever even approached me about joining. My next breakthrough came from the HOA's own documents, their original charter and bylaws. Turns out, Sandra either never read them or chose to ignore them. Their authority extended only to residential parcels under 2 acres within clearly defined subdivision limits, as recorded in the land records. Not only was my farm over 100 times larger, but it also sat entirely outside those limits. Legally speaking, Sandra had no more jurisdiction over my property than she did over land across the county line. But the third find was the real bombshell. I uncovered records showing that in just 3 years, the HOA had collected over $47,000 in fines from residents. But according to state law, individual violations can't be fined more than $200, and each penalty must come after proper notice and the opportunity to appeal. Sandra had bypassed both. She'd been fleecing the neighborhood while padding the HOA's bank account. That's when I called an old friend, Emma Rodriguez, an attorney who specializes in housing law and HOAs. After hearing the details, she didn't hesitate. "This isn't just misconduct, Mike," she said. "It's potentially a major legal scandal. What she's doing is blatantly unlawful." But what I didn't expect was the next person who came to my side, Susan Martinez, the HOA's longtime secretary and the wife of board member David Martinez. She reached out using a coded email, pretending to want to discuss a community garden. We met quietly at a coffee shop far from the neighborhood. Over coffee, Susan revealed she had been quietly documenting Sandra's abuses for 2 years. She slid a thick folder across the table, full of internal emails, call transcripts, and invoices. Sandra had been knowingly imposing fines above legal limits to teach people lessons, as she put it. In a recorded call, she even called residents sheep and said they need strong shepherds. But the most damaging proof? Sandra had been funneling HOA money to her husband's landscaping company for consulting services, work that mainly involved maintaining her own yard. I replied calmly, letting my voice carry across the packed room. "Since I seem to be the central topic tonight, I believe everyone here deserves to hear the full story from both sides before drawing any conclusions." I glanced around, making eye contact with neighbors I had seen in passing for years but never really spoken to, especially when there appears to be some serious misinformation that needs to be cleared up. Emma stood beside me, composed and confident, immediately commanding the room's attention. "Good evening," she began. "I'm Emma Rodriguez, an attorney with a focus on housing law and homeowner rights. I represent Mr. Harrison, and we have several critical documents that this community needs to see before any decisions are made tonight." A hush fell over the crowd. People leaned forward in their seats, sensing this wasn't going to be a routine meeting. Sandra tried to wrest control back. "This really isn't the place," she started, but a voice from the back interrupted. "Actually, Sandra," said Tom Bradley, a retired professor who had lived here for over 2 decades. He stood slowly, his tone firm. "I think we all want to hear what Mike has to say. We've been hearing your version of events for a long time. Some of us have questions." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room, and I could see Sandra's grip on the meeting start to loosen. Emma and I made our way to the front. Susan Martinez sat clutching a USB drive, her expression tense but hopeful. "Thank you for letting me speak," I began. "Before we go any further, let me properly introduce myself. I'm Mike Harrison, retired Chief Planning Inspector for the city. I spent 15 years working in zoning laws, community development, and housing regulation enforcement." Gasps and whispers echoed across the room. I saw Sandra's face pale. "In my time, I've reviewed hundreds of HOA charters, settled countless zoning disputes, and seen firsthand what happens when leadership oversteps its legal bounds." I turned on the room's projector and displayed a county property survey. "Let's look at the facts. Here's an official, certified map of my property. My family has held this land since 1952. The Sunset Valley HOA wasn't even established until 1987. According to your own founding documents, the HOA's jurisdiction applies only to lots under 2 acres within these red lines." I pointed with a laser to the highlighted area. "My 200-acre farm lies completely outside those limits." I looked directly at Sandra. "State law is clear. You have no legal power to enforce anything on my property. You might as well try to find someone living in another town." The room went silent. Then, almost on cue, Sandra jumped to her feet. Her voice was shaking with frustration. "That's absurd. Everyone here is part of the HOA. You can't just claim you're exempt over some technical detail." Emma didn't flinch. "Mrs. Phillips," she said calmly, "this isn't a loophole. These are certified government documents from the county clerk. Are you suggesting they're inaccurate?" I continued, clicking to the next slide, a breakdown of HOA fine collections under Sandra's watch. The problem isn't just jurisdiction. Let's talk about money. Over the last 3 years, Mrs. Phillips has collected $47,000 in fines, but state law caps individual violations at $200 and requires formal notice and appeals before anything is imposed. I pulled up a few examples. Mrs. Thompson was fined $800 for leaving up Christmas lights 2 days too long. The legal maximum is $200. Mr. Johnson was charged $1,500 because his lawn was an inch too high. That's over 7 times the legal limit. Gasps and angry muttering spread. Residents were pulling out their phones, checking their own records. You could feel the mood shift. "And it doesn't stop there," I said, clicking to the next slide. "We have evidence that HOA funds were used for personal gain." I gave Susan a nod. She stood up, took a deep breath, and hit play on the audio system. Sandra's voice filled the room, sharp, dismissive, and arrogant. "These people need to learn who's in charge. Sometimes you've got to make examples out of the troublemakers." People were stunned. Several stood up. Others shook their heads in disbelief. What little trust Sandra had left was vanishing quickly, but I wasn't done. "One final thing," I said, raising my voice slightly to regain focus. I switched to the last slide, revealing a scanned copy of the original 1985 sales contract. When my family sold the land this neighborhood was built on, my grandfather added a clause, one that retained our easement rights and gave us veto power over any future community regulations that could affect our remaining land. I paused, letting the weight of it settle. That means I'm not just exempt, I have the legal authority to challenge and block any HOA rule I consider unreasonable. I turned towards Sandra, whose expression had gone from outraged to outright panic. She stood up so quickly that her chair toppled behind her. I took a deep breath and spoke with calm, firm clarity, my voice reaching every corner of the room. Since I seem to be the central topic of tonight's conversation, it's only fair the community hears the full story, with facts, not just assumptions. I glanced around, making eye contact with neighbors I'd only exchanged waves with before. Emma stood beside me, poised, confident, and commanding attention without raising her voice. "Good evening," she began smoothly. "I'm Emma Rodriguez, an attorney specializing in housing law and homeowners' rights. I represent Mr. Harrison, and we have documents that this community urgently needs to review before continuing this meeting." The atmosphere instantly shifted. People leaned in, eyes widened. This was no ordinary HOA meeting. Sandra tried to regain control. "This isn't the place to—" "Actually," came a steady voice from the back. Tom Bradley, a retired professor, respected by all, stood tall. "I think it's time we all heard Mike's side of things. We've been fed one version for too long, and many of us have questions." Soft murmurs of agreement followed. The floor was mine. I stepped forward, Emma by my side, carrying 2 boxes filled with evidence. "Thank you for allowing me to speak." I turned to face the crowd. "My name is Mike Harrison. I'm a retired chief planning inspector with 15 years of experience in zoning, housing regulations, and municipal development." Gasps rippled through the room. Sandra went visibly pale. "I've reviewed thousands of HOA charters and handled countless disputes. I know exactly how power can be misused when checks and balances fail." I powered up the projector and pointed to a county-certified property survey. "This, ladies and gentlemen, is my land. My family's 200 acres registered since 1952. The Sunset Valley HOA was established in 1987, and as your own charter confirms, its jurisdiction only extends to the subdivision marked here in red. I drew a clear line with the laser. My home is outside that boundary, meaning no fines, no authority, and no legal power over my property. Dead silence, then confusion, then realization. Sandra snapped, "That's outrageous. You can't just exempt yourself." Emma cut in, cool and professional. "These aren't opinions, Mrs. Phillips. These are legal documents from the county recorder's office. Are you accusing the government of fraud?" I continued, flipping to the next slide. But it gets worse. Over the last 3 years, Mrs. Phillips has levied $47,000 in fines, many of them in direct violation of state law. The law caps fines at $200 per infraction, requires notice, and guarantees the right to appeal. I showed the receipts. Mrs. Thompson was fined $800 for leaving holiday lights up 2 extra days. Mr. Johnson was fined $1,500 for having grass 4 inches high instead of 3. The room stirred. Phones came out. Residents were checking their own notices. "And there's more," I said, nodding to Susan Martinez. She pressed play on a recording. Sandra's voice rang out across the room. "Some of these people need to be reminded who's really in charge. If that means making an example out of a few, so be it." Outrage spread like wildfire. "And finally," I said, clicking to one last slide, "here is a copy of the original 1985 land contract. My grandfather included a veto clause. Any community regulation impacting our remaining land required his approval, a legal right I inherited." Sandra was speechless, then furious. Her hands shook as she screamed, "This is a setup, all of it." Tom Bradley rose again. I moved to remove Sandra Phillips from her position as HOA president immediately. 3 voices seconded it before he finished the sentence. Those in favor? Nearly every hand in the room went up, except Sandra's and 2 of her loyal board members. Sandra stood stunned. "You'll all regret this. I'll sue every one of you." Emma calmly replied, "Before you do that, be advised. You'll be served with a class action lawsuit within 48 hours on behalf of every resident you unlawfully fined." Sandra froze, then stormed out. 6 months later. I stood at the same forest green gate that sparked it all, but today I wasn't defending it. I was hanging a new sign, Harrison Family Ranch, established 1952. Sunset Valley Community Garden Welcome Center. That once controversial gate now opened every morning to welcome families to a flourishing 5-acre community garden, built on land I donated. The lawsuit had been a victory. Sandra was forced to return $31,000 in illegal fines. A deeper audit revealed $8,700 in HOA funds paid to her husband's company for non-existent consulting work. Facing criminal charges and bankruptcy, they sold their home at a steep discount and disappeared. Tom Bradley was elected as the new president, winning nearly 90% of the vote. His platform: transparency, legality, real community building. New rules required board votes for fines, only for serious safety violations, and capped at legal limits. Monthly meetings allowed residents to propose ideas. Detailed budget reports were mailed quarterly. Mrs. Thompson, once fined for her Christmas lights, became treasurer. She used her refund to plant a stunning flower garden, now a community landmark. Mr. Johnson, who was fined for his grass, became the garden's coordinator. He now calls it the most united our neighborhood has ever felt. Susan Martinez quit the board and launched an HOA ethics consulting firm. Her first client avoided a lawsuit using policies she developed from our case. Our story made headlines. City planner brings down HOA Tyranny, a blueprint for community reform. The article went viral. I received messages from across the country, people trapped in similar HOA nightmares. So I opened a pro bono legal clinic, fighting back with everything we learned. We've already helped 30 families recover thousands in illegal fines. State lawmakers introduced new legislation requiring annual HOA training on homeowners' rights and legal boundaries. They're calling it the Harrison Act. I never expected to spend retirement like this, but now HOAs actually pay me to audit their governance. The irony isn't lost on me. Today, 43 families grow produce in our community garden. We host a weekend market, drawing people from nearby towns. Kids play, parents chat, elders walk their dogs peacefully. And the Green Gate, still standing. It's not just a piece of wood anymore, it's a symbol, a reminder that no one has the right to bully or intimidate under the guise of community. That real neighborhoods thrive not through fear, but through respect, cooperation, and fairness. So when visitors ask about the infamous HOA battle that reshaped Sunset Valley, I smile and tell them, it was never really about the gate,